there's another way to sort of characterize it too, is to think about two different types of billionaires. So we might think of a wealthy person who works 14, 16 hours a day in a business that produces, say, high quality footwear. And they pay their workers really well. They live in very modest house, but they're worth, hundreds of millions or billions. And in some respects,
hold on a sec.
Buffett
I want to.
Right, Warren Buffett lives in a very modest home, doesn't drive a flashy car. His cars are 10 years old or whatever, and so he lives a very modest life personally, but he controls hundreds of billions of dollars worth of resources. And you could say, well, he's the controlling mind. If it wasn't him, who would be the control? And so what you're talking about is switching the controlling mind. And most entrepreneurs, if they are working to service their customers and not defraud them, are actually providing a service to the community. The trouble is sometimes there's monopoly power, there's fraud, and the commons isn't paid for. But it's a very complicated situation just to broadly characterize wealth as being bad in itself, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, look, what I'm trying to avoid in this particular discussion group is too much of the moral question.
Yeah.
Right? It always creeps in, right? But we just want to talk about what are the macroeconomic effects. And so what are the macroeconomic effects of having these billionaires? And in fact, they're kind of places where money goes to die to an extent, because it goes out of the real economy and gets locked up in, like, $1 that's spent on stock price that goes into the stock market doesn't go into a small business or into expenditure or into building something real, right? It may go into it like $1 that goes into real estate might be speculative, but at least we get the real estate, right? But especially with the thing about real estate is then wages would get paid. But with the stock market, the money just goes there and just sits there, which is why we have this deflationary issue, because the money's going straight from the banks to the stock markets. That's why we have this position that you described at the beginning of the talk, with the Reserve Bank being unable to create inflation and wanting the government, and so that the government and the states are already stepping in and doing all this spending, and we don't know if it's going to be enough. And this is the other great thing about a basic income, and that if it's used in this macroeconomic way, is that it can sort of fill the difference, right? And what so it starts out as, something that just sort of tops up the economy to actually access all of the stuff that's available and prevent deflation. And the point I'm trying to make is that whether you tax a billionaire or not is kind of a separate question to whether you can afford the basic income, and we can actually decouple the two things, right? One of the great things I like about a basic income is it decouples a bunch of stuff in the economy. So at the moment, wages and spending are the same thing, more or less, right? Or they should be, and the difference is made up by debt, right? And so that means we have this problem where we're trying to get the economy going, and the way so what we do, instead of giving people money to spend at the moment, we lend to businesses so they'll hire people. Then the people who are hired will spend the money, right? So we're trying to throw money at people via the business world and the financial world, rather than just give it to them directly. And so you can imagine it. A great analogy I heard recently was by the authors of a book called Money from Nothing. I forget what they were called, but the analogy is, if you want to understand basic income as a monetary tool, think about a car's engine. Right? And for people who know about cars, this makes sense. A carburetor is the old-fashioned way. With the carburetor, it just spins and it mixes the oxygen and the fuel through the motion of the engine itself, causes the carburetor to spin and mix the oxygen and the fuel at a sort of reasonable rate to keep the engine turning. Modern cars have a fuel injection system, so they put exactly the right amount of oxygen and exactly the right amount of fuel in each cylinder. right? A basic income is moving. So you decouple things and you do things independently, and you can actually achieve the right macroeconomic balance. And that's the sort of policy vision of basic income as a macroeconomic tool. Now, hopefully, it gets and this is what we believe I believe anyhow, is that very soon you'll see that it actually gets above the poverty line in less than 10 years, right? Because the actual capacity of the question is, what is the actual capacity of our economy to deliver goods and services? And until you hit that limit, that's when you won't have those negative side effects of inflation. So the question is, do we have enough actual stuff in the economy for us to not have anyone live in poverty? And the answer, I think, is obviously yes. So getting the money, and the reason it wouldn't work is because people go, oh, I've got this basic income now, I don't want to work anymore, and stop making stuff. But I think that risk is overstated.
Yeah, there's two things. The basic income gives you the ability to signal to the market what you need, right? So instead of queuing up in a food line run by the salvos, you go down the shops and you buy it, right? That's one side of the equation, but on the supply
and
side,
unlike with the salvos, your purchase then triggers in production and investment and the expansion of capacity of the thing you just bought. Whereas if it's outside of the market, it may not do that.
Well, yeah, it just increases demand for charity services. But the shops are a perfectly good distribution network. The only thing that's missing is the money to be able to signal what you need. And that's been proven absolutely through the payment of JobKeepers, right? My daughter, as I said, works in welfare, and the numbers of people coming to get food when the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker payments were increased actually fell. So despite more people being out of work, less people came looking for food vouchers because they had the money to spend.
Poverty fell in Australia during the coronavirus crisis, right? Because the payments to the people at the bottom were increased. And notice that we did that, and we still have deflationary, not inflationary pressures. Right? So that means that we've got the capacity to eliminate poverty and go beyond that through cash transfers before we hit an inflationary ceiling. And, we can test it in a fairly safe way.